everyone, welcome to this video about how to subtract negative numbers. So I believe that everything in life is a lot easier when we love ourselves, and today I'd like to encourage you to take a moment to give yourself a little bit of extra love by choosing happiness in some small way. A lot of the time, happiness is just a choice, and you can choose to respond to a situation in a way that brings you more happiness, or you can respond in a way that brings you less happiness. And today I'd like to encourage you to choose the option that's going to bring more happiness into your life. So take 2 deep breaths, give yourself some love, and let's make this math easy.
All right, so when you're subtracting negative numbers, the easiest way to do it is to think of the subtraction as adding the opposite. So in the example of -3 minus a +4, you would basically rewrite that as -3 plus the opposite of a +4, which is a -4. And then you would use the rules for adding negative numbers to simplify that further. In the second example, if I have -3 minus a -8, or sorry, -1 minus a -8, then I would say it's -1 plus a +8 because the opposite of -8 is a +8. And then I would follow the rules for how to add negative numbers. I made another video on how to do this, so if you are not super sure on how to add negative numbers, I'd recommend watching that first. But basically, after I've rewritten the subtraction as adding the opposite, then I can go in and I can say, all right, well, a -3 plus a -4 is a -7. A -1 plus a +8 is going to be a +7 because the one negative canceled out one of the 8 positives, leaving me with 7 positives altogether. So that's how you subtract negative numbers. And I want to show you guys why you can rewrite the subtraction as addition of the opposite. So if we take this example of 0 minus a +3, super simple example, according to what I just taught you, you can rewrite it as 0 plus a -3. And I want to show you why those two things are the same, like why they give you the same result. And I'm going to do this with an analogy I like to use for negatives related to temperature. So if I have ice cubes represent negative numbers and I have fires represent positive numbers, combining them together basically neutralizes them because the fires melt the ice cubes put out the fire, and that gives you an overall number of 0 because they neutralize each other. So let's say that I have an equal number of fires and an equal number of ice cubes. So that's 0 because they're all neutralizing each other. However, if I take that 0 and I take away 3 fires, so if I get rid of 3 of the fires, then that means that my overall temperature is going to be a -3 because I have 3 negatives that are not being melted by the fires. So that's what 0 minus a +3 would look like in this analogy. Now, if I erase that and I say, okay, well, I know that that's going to equal -3, so I'm actually not going to erase that part. So I know that that part equals -3. Well, what if I rewrote that as 0 plus the opposite? Well, if I were to add in 3 little ice cubes, forgive my drawing, and I had 0, so an equal number of ice cubes and fires, and then I added in 3 negatives, that's also going to give me an overall temperature of -3. So these two things they mean the same thing. And you could look at that for if you were subtracting negatives as well, because if you were to take away 4 ice cubes, you would end up with a +4 because these 4 fires would not have ice cubes to put them out. Or if I erase that and I said, okay, well, it's supposed to be equal to adding 4 fires. So it's supposed to be equal to this. You can see that that would be true because I'm not going to be very good at drawing fires. Let's just draw triangles. If I were to add in 4 fires, you can see that would give you the same answer and you would still have a positive 4. And so that's one reason why subtracting a number is the same thing as adding the opposite of that number. Another way you could look at this is if you have negative numbers represent debt. So if I had negative 8 minus a negative 3, that would mean that I have $8 of debt, and then I would take away 3 of those debts. So if I cancel out 3 of those debts, that means that I have an overall debt of negative 5. Or I could do negative 8 plus positive 3, which means that I have 8 debts and then somebody gave me $3, and I could use those $3 to pay off 3 of my debts, which would give me a overall debt of negative 5. And as you can see, these two ways of solving it give you the exact same result. So subtracting a negative number like we did here is the same thing as adding a positive number. But in my opinion, it's a lot easier to do addition than it is to do subtraction. And so this method is the easier way to solve that. So if you had something like this problem where you're subtracting a negative decimal, the way that you would do that is you would rewrite it as 27.51 plus the opposite of that. So if you add a positive 41.35, then you can just add those two decimals together and you do 27.51 plus 41.35. That would give you 6, 8, bring down the decimal, 7 plus 1 is 8, 2 plus 4 is 6, and so you get 68.86. You could also do this to subtract negative fractions. So you could say, all right, well, if I have a negative 3/5 minus a negative 1/5, I can rewrite that as negative 3/5 plus the opposite of negative 1/5, which is a positive 1/5. And a negative 3 plus a positive 1 equals a negative 2. And I put that over 5 because when you're adding fractions, you only add the numerators. And you have to make sure you have common denominators, but we already had a common denominator here, so we're good. So this method can also be very helpful when you're doing algebra and you're trying to combine like terms, or really anything in algebra. Anytime you see a minus sign, I would encourage you to think about it as adding the opposite. So instead of looking at it as 5x minus 3y, I would think of it as 5x plus a negative 3y. You don't always have to write it out, but thinking about that can be really helpful. And the reason is because with addition, you can rearrange addition in whatever order you want. Because 1 plus 2 is the same thing as 2 plus 1, but that's not the case with subtraction. So in algebra, it's really helpful to rearrange the different terms in equations a lot. And so that's why it's really helpful to think of any subtraction as adding the opposite of whatever it is that you're subtracting. Because in this case, if you wanted to combine these like terms, you could rearrange it and say that you have 5x plus a negative 2x. And then you could combine those to say that you have 3x's. And with the y's, you could rearrange that addition to say that you have plus a negative 3y plus 7y, which means that you would have 4y's. And that would be your simplified expression. But that's only possible because we rewrote it as adding negatives, because you can't rearrange subtraction, but you can rearrange addition. So to summarize, whenever you're subtracting negative numbers, you're going to rewrite the subtraction as adding the opposite of the subtrahend. So if you have a negative minus a positive, you're going to rewrite it as a negative plus the opposite of the positive. Or if you're subtracting a negative, you would write it as adding a positive. Again, subtracting a negative is adding a positive, regardless of what the first number is. You basically are going to add the opposite of whatever that number is. And that's how you subtract negative numbers. I hope this was helpful for you. Let me know how easy this was for you in the comments below, and then subscribe to my YouTube channel for more easy math videos. You may also want to check out my negative numbers playlist. And if you'd like more help with your math homework, you can go to mathtutoringonline.com to ask a question or book a one-on-one tutoring session. See you soon!